In this unboxing presentation of the ServiceWorker prototype I've been working on the past few days. So let's start immediately with some web page I'm going to use as a demo of the feature. So this is a very simple web page which we can see defines some header. The ServiceWorker header actually defines some ServiceWorker proxy that is going to be executed client side and handle some requests. So the request worker is going to apply on all the requests containing this part. So actually, as you can see, this is some non-existent folder at the root of my website. The second part of the header is actually the path to the JavaScript file that contains the source code of the header of the service worker. So the sw.js file, which we are going to see later on. Let's continue to explore this very simple page. As you can see, it contains two iframes whose objective is to fetch and display the content of two files. Those two files actually do not exist on the server, as you can see here, but actually have the same pattern as the service worker base URL, which means that actually a browser supporting service worker will actually let the worker handle those requests and reply with some content. However, obviously, a browser which does not support workers will basically return an error because those files do not exist on the server. Alright, so let's have a look at worker file and what it's going to do. The first thing the worker is doing basically is setting the version of the API to be 1. Actually, there is not much point in doing this at this time because there is only the version 1 of the API being defined at this moment. However, since it's included in all the examples I have seen until now, I'm actually doing that, but it's actually very straightforward. The second thing I'm actually doing is setting some code to be executed once the worker is being installed. As can be seen, this is actually only doing one operation, which is making sure that some cache called main cache actually exists on the computer. If it's not the case, it's going to create some new cache, which is going to download some file, an image file, that can be found on my own server. And then give some name to the cache being created just at the moment. At this point, you may want to wait until the cache is actually ready. The reason for this is that the download of the files actually done asynchronously, which means that actually at this point you have no guarantee at all that the GIF myself file is actually fetched or actually exists on the server, or that the user was actually online. So of course in this demo it doesn't really matter, as we are going to see later, but if you want to abort the installation of the worker in case there is any problem, you may want to use the wait until function, which is also asynchronous. The ready function of the cache is a function that returns some promise that will return true in case the worker actually becomes ready, which means that all the files that are supposed to be fetched are actually fetched and the fetch operation was a success. Alright, so now we have seen what happens on the worker is actually installed. Let's see what the worker is finally doing on each request. We have the fetch event, which is called for every outgoing request, which match the patterns defined on the header, seen on the previous page. When this happens, actually the code is checking for the URL of the request, for the presence of some pattern called the GIF pattern. So basically, in case the GIF pattern is found in the URL, the worker is supposed to respond using some file found in the main cache. Actually, you can find this is the image I put in the cache earlier one. At this time, it still does not matter whether the cache is ready or not. And the reason for this is that the match function also returns a promise, which will actually resolve once the file is ready, or which will reject if there is any problem with the file. The response with function is taking this asynchronous promise argument and will actually respond to the client once the promise resolves or rejects, depending on the status. Of course, this is what we do for the case where we have the GIF pattern. In all the other cases, I am showing a different behavior, where actually I reply with some inline response. An inline response is much more customizable, but because you can check yours for yourself, the status code, the headers, and the content of the response. In this case, I did something very straightforward, like setting a very small text messages, saying that the request to the URL was actually intercepted and never made its way to the server. Of course, in our real example, we should probably use the XML HTTP request polyfill included in this simple sample to actually fetch content on the server and probably use some information available locally to build some new content that's original and can use both the server side and the client side content. Alright, this is basically everything I wanted to show. So the first thing I'm going to do is try to run this website with the implementation of ServiceWorker disabled. As expected, you can see that this results in 2 error messages that actually happen because the files are not found on my server. Alright, so now let's start Fiddler. Fiddler is actually a client-side proxy that I have actually been using in my process. I built some custom gscript.net scripts for Fiddler that actually run some Google V8 virtual machines to host the user code of the proxy, ServiceWorker proxy. So at this point, I'm not going to show the implementation right now because it can be quite tedious, but let's see the result of the new proxy that's been set up. And let's refresh the page. As you can see, the first web page actually showed some message saying that the request was intercepted, and the second iframe is actually displaying some image, the image that was already put in the cache previously. So let's have a look at the request being done. Firstly, we have the request to the web page that actually shows the ServiceWorker header we defined previously. At this time, you can see that the implementation is fetching the content of the worker with the user code that was shown previously. At this point in time, actually we have the 2 contents, the 2 requests that have been replied by the worker. Alright, so we can also view the timeline to see how this happens in real time. As you can see, the request to download the images only happen after the first page has been completely given to the client, which can only happen once the worker is ready. So using a service worker implies some delay that will need to be solved using inlining or using HTTP2 protocol, which allow you to promote files even if the client is not asking for them. You can also see that the workers replied to 2 of the requests that were following. Alright, this is all for my first look at the service worker implementation. I will be back soon with a blog post explaining everything in more details. Thank you and see you next time.